The human fleet drifted through the vast emptiness of space, with the endless blackness stretching in all directions. On board the flagship, Commander Darius Stone paced nervously in the control room. His crew was tired, having been out in deep space for weeks. Their mission had been routine, but something had changed. There was a feeling in the air, a quiet tension that no one could explain. It started with a signal. At first, it was barely a whisper, almost drowned by the static of deep space. But Lieutenant Ava Hayes, the fleet's communication officer, had sharp ears. She had noticed it. The faint pattern in the noise, the series of bursts that didn't match anything they had encountered before. "Commander," she said, her voice steady but filled with curiosity, "I think we've got something." Darius turned toward her. "Is it a distress signal?" He didn't need to ask. He knew it was. The pattern was unmistakable, even if the message was incomplete. It came from a region of space that hadn't been explored in decades, an area once controlled by the Zar'xians, a mysterious species that vanished long ago without a trace. Eva quickly adjusted the frequency, trying to isolate the signal from the overwhelming noise around them. "It's weak, but it's definitely a Zar'xian transmission. I can't make out the full message, but the location matches their last known territory." Darius frowned. The Zar'xians had always been an enigma, a species with technology far beyond anything humanity had ever created. They had been an advanced civilization, and then they were gone. No one knew why, and no one had found any trace of them. Until now. "We need to investigate," Darius said. He glanced at his crew, many of whom looked hesitant. The Zar'xian territory was dangerous, full of unknowns, but Darius had never been one to shy away from a challenge. The signal could be a clue to the Zar'xians' disappearance, and that was a mystery worth solving. The fleet commander turned to Lieutenant Hayes. "Get the fleet ready. We're heading to the source of that signal." Within hours, the human fleet was on its way, entering a part of space that had been avoided for years. The stars seemed to disappear as they neared the Zar'xian sector, and the blackness of space grew heavier. The ship's sensors failed to pick up anything at first, the silence too complete. It was as though they were entering a forbidden zone. But then, they found it. A massive Zar'xian ship, floating aimlessly in space, its engines long dead. The fleet's scanners confirmed that it was a scout ship, a vessel that once belonged to the Zar'xian fleet. It had been abandoned for what seemed like ages. Darius's heart pounded in his chest. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "This is where it all ended." He gave the order to board the derelict ship, and the human crew prepared to enter. The mystery of the Zar'xian fleet was just beginning, and they were about to uncover secrets that would change everything. The human fleet slowly drifted closer to the derelict Zar'xian ship, its massive, dark form floating in the emptiness of space. Commander Darius Stone stood on the bridge, his hands gripping the armrests of his seat as he watched the giant vessel through the viewing window. The ship was unlike anything the humans had ever seen. Its sleek, smooth design gave off an eerie, almost unsettling feeling, like a predator lying in wait. "Prepare to board," Darius ordered, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. He glanced at Lieutenant Ava Hayes, who was already adjusting the ship's sensors to get a better reading on the abandoned vessel. They were venturing into a part of space that few had ever dared to explore, and the mystery of the Zar'xian fleet weighed heavily on their minds. As the fleet's shuttle bay doors opened, the small human team, armed and ready, boarded their shuttles. Darius led the way, flanked by his trusted officers. The air was thick with the tension of the unknown, each member of the crew unsure of what awaited them on the other side. The shuttle lifted off, its engines humming as it moved toward the derelict Zar'xian ship. The shuttle gently touched down on the surface of the abandoned vessel. The crew disembarked, their boots hitting the cold metal floor with a soft thud. The corridors of the Zar'xian ship were eerily quiet, the faint hum of the ship's life support systems the only sound. Dust and debris were scattered across the floors, signs that the ship had been abandoned for a long time. Darius motioned for the team to move forward. They carefully stepped through the narrow, dark hallways, their flashlights flickering as they swept the rooms for any signs of life, or signs of what had happened to the Zar'xians. As they ventured deeper into the ship, it became clear that this place had once been alive with activity. The technology, though advanced, was familiar in its design. Yet, something was missing. There was no trace of the crew, no sign of struggle. It was as if the Zar'xians had simply vanished. Suddenly, they reached the central command room. The door opened with a low hiss, revealing a large chamber filled with strange technology that seemed to hum with an energy all its own. A massive control panel sat in the center of the room, its lights flickering weakly, as if struggling to remain powered. At the front of the room, an ancient screen displayed a broken transmission, a garbled message in the Zar'xian language. Ava stepped forward, carefully examining the screen. "It's still receiving data," she said, her fingers dancing over the controls. "But it's not much. I can only get fragments." Darius's heart raced. This was it, the last communication from the Zar'xian fleet. As Ava worked to decode the message, Darius studied the room. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though there was no one there. The air felt heavier, as if the ship itself was alive, waiting to reveal its secrets. Then, Ava's voice broke the silence. "I'm pulling something up. It's a distress call. A warning." Her eyes widened as the words began to appear on the screen. They were attacked. The fleet was attacked, and they didn't stand a chance. Darius's stomach sank. The Zar'xians, once the most powerful species in the galaxy, had been destroyed by something unknown, something far beyond their understanding. The mystery was deepening, and now the crew was entangled in a puzzle they had no way of solving. But they had no choice but to continue. The air inside the Zar'xian ship felt heavier with each step the human crew took. Commander Darius Stone led the way through the eerie hallways, his boots echoing off the cold, smooth metal floor. He could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him and his crew. The more they discovered, the less certain they were about what had happened here. The Zar'xians had been a powerful species, but their once grand civilization was now reduced to nothing but silence and dust. Ava Hayes, the communications officer, was still at the central console, her fingers flying over the Zar'xian controls in a desperate attempt to decode the broken transmission. "I'm getting more," she said quietly, her voice tinged with frustration. "But it's fragmented, like they were cut off in the middle of sending a report. Whoever, whatever, did this to them didn't want them to communicate." Darius glanced back at her. He could see the determination in her eyes, but also the unease. Whatever had destroyed the Zar'xian fleet had done so with terrifying efficiency, and it was clear that this threat was something the humans had never faced before. "Anything useful?" Darius asked. Ava paused for a moment, reading the screen, before speaking again. A few words, something about forces and decay. It's hard to make sense of it. Darius rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "We need to keep moving. We're not going to find answers sitting here." The crew continued deeper into the ship, moving cautiously through the dimly lit corridors. The ship's once advanced technology was now silent and lifeless, and it felt as though it had been abandoned in a hurry. There was no sign of a battle, no scorch marks or wreckage to indicate any sort of conflict. It was as if the Zar'xians had just vanished. As they moved through a narrow hallway, Darius stopped in his tracks. There, lying against the wall, was a Zar'xian uniform, torn and stained. It was clear that it had been left in haste. The uniform was like nothing the humans had seen before, sleek and form-fitting, with a dark metallic sheen. But what caught Darius's eye was something that was not quite right about the way it had been discarded. The fabric was frayed, and parts of it were torn, as though someone had been in a desperate rush to escape something. The crew gathered around the uniform, their faces grim. Darius knelt beside it, his fingers brushing over the fabric. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. There's no sign of a battle. No bodies. Just this. As they continued their search, they stumbled upon a sealed door at the end of a long corridor. The door was unlike the others they had encountered. It was heavily reinforced and seemed to pulse with a faint energy. The team hesitated. The tension in the air was thick, and Darius could feel his heart racing. He had to know what was behind that door. He gestured for the team to stand back and ordered one of the engineers to override the door's security systems. After a tense few moments, the door opened with a heavy hiss. Inside was a large chamber, dark and foreboding. At the far end of the room, a large display screen blinked to life. What they saw on the screen made Darius's blood run cold. It was a recording, one that the Zar'xians had left behind. The video showed a fleet of Zar'xian ships, their advanced designs moving gracefully through space. Suddenly, the images shifted, showing a strange, dark shape moving in the distance. The Zar'xian ships moved closer, and then, in an instant, everything changed. The dark shape expanded, and something terrifying seemed to unfold, tearing through the fleet with unstoppable force. The Zar'xians were helpless against it. The recording cut off abruptly, but the words that lingered in the silence were clear. We were not prepared. We could not fight it. It consumes everything. Darius's mind raced. What had the Zar'xians encountered? And why had they been so utterly destroyed? The answers were slipping through their fingers, but one thing was certain. Whatever had wiped out the Zar'xian fleet, it was now a threat to humanity as well. And they were no longer just observers. They were part of a deadly game. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of the ship's failing systems. Commander Darius Stone stood frozen in front of the screen, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The Zar'xians, an ancient and powerful race, had been wiped out by something far beyond their understanding. The footage showed their fleet, powerful ships capable of withstanding almost anything, being torn apart by an invisible force. There were no weapons visible, no explosions, just destruction, fast, precise, and utterly unstoppable. Darius turned to face his crew, who had gathered around, their faces pale and filled with disbelief. The air in the room felt thick, and every breath seemed harder to take. Lieutenant Ava Hayes, still staring at the screen, spoke first. They didn't even see it coming, she said softly. Her voice was shaky, but her eyes were focused, trying to piece together what little information they had. They had no idea what they were up against. It was like it didn't even exist in our space. Darius nodded grimly. He felt the same. Whatever had destroyed the Zar'xian fleet didn't follow the rules of space and time as they knew them. There were no signs of conventional weapons, no laser blasts, no missiles, no shockwaves. It was as if the enemy didn't need weapons at all. We need to figure out what this is, Darius said, his voice steady. And we need to do it fast. We can't afford to underestimate whatever this enemy is. If we don't understand it, we'll be next. The crew nodded in agreement, but the sense of dread was palpable. The Zar'xians were one of the most advanced civilizations the galaxy had ever known, and they had fallen in an instant. The humans were no match for that kind of power, not yet. Ava turned to Darius, her expression tense. "Commander, there's something else," she said. "The transmission. I've been able to decode a bit more. It's not just a warning. It's a plea for help." Darius raised an eyebrow. A plea for help? From the Zar'xians? Who could they ask for help from if they didn't even know what they were facing? "I don't know," Ava admitted. "But there's something about the final message. It's incomplete, but it mentions something called the Harbingers. They were the ones that attacked the Zar'xian fleet. It's like they were preparing for something. But they never finished." Darius's mind raced. The Harbingers. He repeated the name under his breath. It sounded ominous, like a force sent to wipe out everything in its path. He had to know more. The crew spent the next few hours combing through the rest of the ship, searching for anything that could provide answers. As they explored the abandoned vessel, the sense of unease grew. The Zar'xians had been experts in technology, and yet they had left behind so little, just the wreckage and a few cryptic messages. Finally, they discovered something. Hidden deep in the lower levels of the ship was a chamber filled with strange alien machinery. The walls were lined with data pads and consoles, all of them displaying unreadable information. But one console, isolated from the rest, seemed to be functioning. Ava worked quickly to access the data. "It's a map," she said, as the screen flickered to life. "A map of the galaxy. But it's different. It's showing something. Something moving." Darius stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the map. At the center was a pinpoint, slowly pulsing with a red light. "What is that?" he asked. Ava's voice was tight as she answered. "It's the Harbinger's location. And they're coming." The message was clear. The Zar'xians had tried to warn them, but the humans were too late. The Harbingers were already on the move, and they were headed straight for the human fleet. Darius clenched his fists. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered. "We need to be ready. Whatever this is, we face it head-on. The Zar'xians couldn't stop it, but we will." The threat was real. And now, it was their turn to fight. The human fleet was on high alert. As Commander Darius Stone stared at the display showing the Harbinger's location, the weight of the situation hit him like a heavy fist. This wasn't just a distant threat. It was coming straight for them. The Zar'xians had failed to stop the enemy, and now the human race was on the front lines of this terrifying new war. Darius had always been a leader who believed in action. Standing still was never an option. As the fleet commander, it was his duty to protect his people. But what they were about to face was unlike anything they had ever seen. The Harbingers had already destroyed one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, and now they were coming for the humans. "We're not waiting for them to reach us," Darius declared, his voice firm. "We're going to take the fight to them." His crew gathered around the central command table, all eyes focused on the map showing the Harbingers' movements. Lieutenant Ava Hayes had spent the last few hours analyzing the data, but the more she uncovered, the more she realized how little they knew about their enemies. The Harbingers seemed to be everywhere at once, moving with an unnatural speed. And their ships, if they could even be called ships, were unlike anything the humans had encountered. "There's no doubt they're preparing for something," Ava said, turning to Darius. "But what that is, I can't say. Their movements don't make sense. It's almost as if they're waiting for us to come to them." "We'll make sure they don't have to wait much longer," Darius said. "Get the fleet ready. We'll move out in 1 hour." The crew worked quickly, preparing for a mission that was as dangerous as it was uncertain. Darius knew that if they didn't act now, the Harbingers would reach Earth, and humanity would be at the mercy of an enemy they didn't understand. It was a fight for survival, and the only way to win was to make the first move. The fleet launched into space, the ships moving at full speed toward the Harbinger's last known position. The stars outside the windows of the ships blurred as they cut through space, but the feeling of unease never left. No one knew what they would find when they arrived, but Darius was determined to face it head-on. As they approached the coordinates, the fleet fell into a tight formation. Their sensors scanned the area for any sign of the enemy, but there was nothing. Just endless darkness. No ships. No energy signatures. It was like the Harbingers had disappeared entirely. "Stay sharp," Darius ordered. "They've got to be here somewhere." The fleet moved closer, ready for whatever might come. Suddenly, a ripple in the space around them caught their attention. It was small at first, like a flicker in the air. But then it grew, spreading outward, like a wave of distortion rippling through the fabric of space itself. Darius's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The Harbingers were here. Out of nowhere, a ship materialized in front of them. It wasn't like any human or Zar'xian ship. Its form was amorphous, constantly shifting, as if it didn't belong in their dimension. The ship shimmered, flickering between visible and invisible, and its presence seemed to warp the space around it. "We've got company," Ava said, her voice tight with fear. Before anyone could react, the Harbinger ship unleashed a wave of energy, disrupting the human fleet's systems. Communications scrambled, shields flickered, and the ship shook as if they were being pulled in every direction. The enemy's weapon didn't need physical force to cause damage. It simply manipulated space itself. Darius gripped the armrests of his chair. "Return fire. Target the energy pulse. Don't let them disrupt our systems again." The human fleet launched an immediate counterattack. Weapons fire lit up the dark expanse of space, but the Harbinger ship moved with unnatural speed, dodging and weaving in ways that defied all logic. The humans were outmatched. They could hardly land a hit. "We need to adapt," Darius shouted. "We can't keep fighting like this. They're too fast." Ava's mind raced. She had an idea. "Commander, what if we can't fight them directly? What if we can outsmart them? We know they're using some form of space manipulation. If we disrupt their field, we can force them into our dimension." Darius's eyes widened. "Can we do it?" "I think so," Ava replied. "But it'll be risky. We'll need to overload their sensors." "Do it," Darius ordered without hesitation. "We don't have a choice." As the human fleet executed the plan, the Harbinger ship continued its erratic dance. But Ava's idea worked. The human ships created a pulse, pushing against the space-distorting energy the Harbingers relied on. The Harbinger ship slowed, just enough for the humans to strike. The victory against the Harbingers, though significant, left Commander Darius Stone with more questions than answers. The human fleet had successfully destroyed one of their enemy ships, but the battle had shown just how powerful the Harbingers were. They could warp space, dodge attacks with impossible precision, and had weapons unlike anything the humans had ever seen. This wasn't a war the human fleet could win with brute force alone. "We can't keep relying on blind luck," Darius muttered as he stared at the starry expanse outside the bridge window. The crew had just finished celebrating their hard-earned victory, but the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on them. "We need to know everything about the Harbingers, every detail, every weakness, everything we can use." Lieutenant Ava Hayes stepped forward, her face reflecting the same concern. "We barely scratched the surface, Commander. We need more information. Whatever the Zar'xians left behind, it could hold the key to defeating them." The Zar'xians were gone, but their legacy remained, buried within their forgotten research and technology. The human fleet had come to the abandoned Zar'xian ship to uncover the truth, and now it was more important than ever. Darius had already decided. They would search every inch of the Zar'xian wreckage until they found something, anything, that could give them an advantage. The crew began scouring the remaining sections of the ship, each officer determined to unearth new secrets. Ava led the charge, working with the engineers to unlock the ship's most secure databanks. They combed through archives, searching for anything related to the Harbingers or the forces that had destroyed the Zar'xian fleet. Hours passed as the team uncovered fragment after fragment of information. Most of the data was too damaged to be useful, but then Ava found something that caught her attention. It was a strange map, not just of space, but of dimensions, layers upon layers of them, stretching into infinity. The map displayed multiple realities, some familiar, others twisted and warped. "What is this?" Ava murmured as she zoomed in on the map. She recognized some of the sectors, but others were completely unknown. "This isn't just a map of space, it's a map of the multiverse." Darius joined her, his eyes scanning the screen. "Multiverse? Are you saying these Harbingers aren't from this dimension?" Ava nodded slowly. "Yes. This map, it shows a connection to other realities. The Harbingers, they don't just travel through space, they travel through dimensions. They are not bound by the same laws that govern us." Darius's mind raced. The idea was staggering. The Harbingers weren't just enemies from another world. They were entities that existed outside of their reality. Their power wasn't just physical. They could bend the very fabric of space and time to their will. Then the attack on the Zar'xians was more than just a war, Darius said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was an invasion. Ava's fingers flew across the console as she delved deeper into the map. The Harbingers have been doing this for centuries. They destroy civilizations across dimensions, wiping them out before they can grow too strong. The Zar'xians weren't the first, and they won't be the last. Darius clenched his fists. This was worse than he had imagined. The threat was far beyond anything they could have prepared for. But the map was their only hope. If the Harbingers could travel across dimensions, perhaps the humans could do the same. We need to know how to fight them in their own territory, Darius said firmly. Prepare the fleet. We're going to follow the map. Ava hesitated, then nodded. It's going to be dangerous. We have no idea what we'll find in those dimensions. We'll find a way, Darius replied. We have to. Humanity's survival depends on it. The crew began to prepare for the next step of their mission. The human fleet would venture into the unknown, crossing into other dimensions, hoping to find a way to stop the Harbingers before they could destroy everything. The legacy of the Zar'xians was their only lead, and it was time to follow it, no matter where it took them. The human fleet, now fully aware of the threat the Harbingers posed, was ready to take the next step. Commander Darius Stone stood on the bridge of the flagship, staring at the map that Ava had discovered. The coordinates it displayed pointed to a tear in space, an entrance to another dimension. The Zar'xians had hidden the secrets of their war with the Harbingers in a place beyond their own reality, and now the human fleet was about to cross over. We're leaving known space behind, Darius said, his voice low but resolute. Once we cross into that dimension, we don't know what we'll find. But we need to do this if we're going to stop the Harbingers. Ava stood beside him, her fingers moving across the console as she worked to fine-tune the fleet's systems for interdimensional travel. I've been studying the map, she said, her tone serious. The Harbingers are already in this dimension, waiting for us. But there's a chance, just a small chance, that we can use their own path to our advantage. Darius turned to her. What do you mean? Ava glanced at the screen, her eyes scanning the data. The Harbingers are like shadows in this place. They don't follow the same laws of space and time that we do. If we use their own methods of travel, we might be able to slip past them without being detected. It was a risky plan, but it was the only plan they had. The human fleet had no idea what lay on the other side of the dimensional rift, but they couldn't afford to hesitate. Do it, Darius commanded. We move out now. The fleet began its journey through the rift, the ships shuddering as they passed from one reality to another. The stars outside the windows of the ships seemed to warp and stretch, bending into unfamiliar shapes. Time itself felt as though it was slowing down, and the familiar sensation of space seemed to disappear altogether. As the fleet crossed deeper into the unknown, a sense of unease spread through the crew. The vast, empty space around them seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, like a living thing watching them from the shadows. The sensors on the ships flickered, and the usual calm of space travel was replaced by a constant, nagging feeling of danger. Keep your eyes open, Darius warned. We're entering unknown territory. Stay sharp. Ava worked quickly, making adjustments to the ship's systems as the fleet moved further into the strange dimension. The Harbinger's energy signature is faint, but I'm picking something up ahead, she said. It's a ship, but it's unlike anything we've seen before. I think it's theirs. Darius's heart skipped a beat. Can we get close without being detected? Ava's fingers flew across the console. It's risky, but it's our best shot. If we can get close enough, we might be able to learn more about them. The fleet moved closer to the Harbinger ship, staying in the shadows, just out of sight. The ship ahead was massive, its shape constantly shifting, as though it didn't belong in this dimension at all. It was a living thing, an entity, not just a ship. The sensors couldn't fully comprehend its form, and the readings were erratic. "This is it," Darius said, his voice tense. "We're in their territory now. This is where we make our move." As the human fleet slowly approached the Harbinger ship, Darius felt a strange sense of dread. The Harbingers were close, so close that he could almost feel their presence pressing down on them. They were an enemy unlike any other, unnatural, impossible to predict. But the human fleet had come this far. They had no choice but to face them head-on. "Prepare for engagement," Darius ordered. "This is where we either win or lose." The tension on the bridge was thick as the crew readied themselves. Everyone knew that they were about to face the unknown, and the outcome was uncertain. But one thing was clear: the battle for humanity's survival had just begun. And this time, they weren't running away. The human fleet hovered just outside the massive Harbinger ship, which flickered in and out of reality like a mirage. Its size was impossible to comprehend, its form constantly shifting as if it wasn't entirely bound by the laws of physics. The crew, though prepared, felt the weight of the moment press down on them. This was the enemy that had wiped out the Zar'xians, and now it was their turn to face it. Commander Darius Stone stood at the bridge, his gaze fixed on the dark, ever-changing shape of the Harbinger ship. "We're entering their territory, and we're not leaving without answers. Prepare for battle," he ordered, his voice steady but filled with an edge of determination. Lieutenant Ava Hayes worked quickly at the console, her eyes darting over the strange, shifting readings. "We've got a lock on this ship, but the energy readings are chaotic. I can't get a clear fix on their weapon systems. They don't follow the same rules we do." Darius nodded. He had known this battle would be unlike any other. The Harbingers manipulated dimensions themselves, bending the fabric of space and time. Conventional tactics wouldn't work here. The human fleet had to be creative, adaptable. "We can't match their power, but we can outthink them," Darius said, his voice sharp. "Aim for their weak spots, whatever they may be." Ava turned to him, her face pale but determined. "The ship's energy core is unstable. If we hit it at the right moment, it could disrupt their whole system. But we need to be quick." "Then let's be quick," Darius said. "Move in." The human ships began their slow approach, weaving through the strange, distorted space. The tension in the air was suffocating. Each crew member knew that any misstep could be their last. Darius felt a knot in his stomach as they got closer to the Harbinger ship. The sense of overwhelming power was almost tangible. The enemy was right there, just ahead. Suddenly, the Harbinger ship shifted. It seemed to expand, folding in on itself before launching a shockwave that rattled the human fleet. The ships lurched as if they were being pulled in every direction at once, their systems flickering and crashing. Alarms blared throughout the fleet as the energy pulses attacked their shields. "Shields are failing," shouted one of the crew members. "Reinforce them," Darius barked. He watched the chaos unfold before him, but he knew they couldn't afford to panic. "Keep moving forward. We've got one chance." Ava worked quickly, tapping into the enemy ship's energy flow. "I can redirect their power," she said, her fingers flying across the controls. "It'll only give us a few seconds, but it'll buy us time." Darius's heart pounded in his chest. "Do it." The human ships pushed forward, now dangerously close to the Harbinger vessel. In a flash, Ava activated the override. The Harbinger ship's energy systems staggered, and a moment of vulnerability opened up. The human fleet launched everything they had: missiles, energy blasts, and firepower, aimed directly at the enemy's unstable core. The explosions were deafening. The Harbinger ship shook violently, as if it were struggling against the energy pulse directed at its heart. For a moment, it flickered, its form becoming more solid and less ethereal. But then, with a deafening roar, the ship seemed to fracture, its surface collapsing inward. But just when the human fleet thought they had won, the Harbinger ship released one final devastating energy wave. The shockwave tore through space, engulfing everything in its path. The human ship shook violently, and Darius felt the sting of reality bending around him. "Commander," Ava screamed, her voice cracking. The fleet was on the edge of destruction. The shockwave had left them vulnerable. The enemy wasn't finished yet, and they were dangerously close to being overwhelmed. But in the chaos, Darius noticed something. The Harbinger ship was weakening, its form no longer flickering with the same strength. The pulse they had triggered was working. The enemy's power was starting to collapse. This was their moment. "Now," Darius shouted, "finish it." With everything they had left, the human fleet launched a final assault. Energy beams, missiles, and concentrated firepower hammered the Harbinger ship. With a final, violent explosion, the ship disintegrated in a burst of energy, fading into nothingness. The human fleet was battered, but they had won. They had survived. Darius leaned back in his chair, breathing heavily. They had faced an enemy unlike any they had ever known, and they had won. But the victory was bittersweet. The war wasn't over. The Harbingers were gone, but the forces behind them still loomed in the shadows. "Prepare for a long fight," Darius muttered to himself. "This is just the beginning." The human fleet moved away from the wreckage of the Harbinger ship, knowing that their journey was far from over. But for now, they had taken a stand, and they had won. The silence after the battle was deafening. The Harbinger ship was gone, its remains nothing more than debris floating in the cold, dark expanse of space. The human fleet, battered and bruised, had won the fight. But the victory felt hollow. The damage to their ships was extensive, and the crew was exhausted. Yet, Commander Darius Stone knew they had only bought themselves time. The real battle was just beginning. "We need to regroup," Darius said as he stood on the bridge, surveying the fleet. "Check all systems and get our ships in working order. We're not out of danger yet." Lieutenant Ava Hayes looked over her console. "I'm seeing significant damage across the fleet, but we'll be able to repair most of it. It'll take some time, but we're alive, Commander. We've bought ourselves that much." Darius nodded, but felt the weight of the situation pressing on him. They had taken down the Harbinger ship, but that didn't mean they were safe. The enemy wasn't just a fleet of ships. They were something far worse. An unknown force from beyond the fabric of space itself. And that force, whatever it was, would come for them again. "Commander," Ava spoke again, breaking his thoughts. "I've been analyzing the data from the Harbinger ship. We've learned a lot, but we've barely scratched the surface. The Harbingers are not the end of this war. They're just a symptom of something much larger. The entity they serve is out there, and it's coming for us." Darius turned to face her, his expression hard. "How long do we have?" Ava paused, looking at the data she'd gathered. If we're right, the Harbingers were a part of an ancient cycle, something that feeds on entire civilizations. The Harbingers were just the first wave. The real threat is still on its way. "Great," Darius muttered. "So, we've beaten one enemy, and now we face something far worse." "Yes, sir," Ava said, her voice unwavering. "But we know more about them now. We know their methods, and we know their weaknesses. We're not helpless anymore." Darius looked out at the vast expanse of space, the stars distant and cold. The battle they had won today felt like nothing in comparison to the war ahead. They had learned a lot about the enemy, but it was clear that understanding their foes didn't guarantee survival. "We've got one shot at this," Darius said, his voice steady. "If we don't act quickly, if we don't find a way to strike before the enemy fully arrives, Earth is finished. We have to take the fight to them before they can strike back." Ava's eyes narrowed. "I agree. But we can't just rush in blindly. We need to rebuild, regroup, and prepare. The Harbingers were tough, but they weren't the whole picture. We need to find the heart of the enemy's power and take it down." "We'll find it," Darius said, his gaze hardening. "We'll track down their origin, their power source, and we'll destroy it. This war won't end until we do." The fleet began to move again, albeit slower this time. They had bought themselves a brief moment of peace, but the threat loomed over them, far greater than any battle they had fought. They would need every ounce of their strength, ingenuity, and determination to face what was coming. As the fleet prepared to continue their journey into the unknown, Darius couldn't help but think of the civilians back on Earth. He had promised to protect them, to keep them safe. But the war they were about to fight would change everything. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking the fight to the enemy, wherever it came from. "We'll make it," Darius muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "We have to." The human fleet, now scared but unbroken, steeled themselves for the long road ahead. The war was not over. It had only just begun. The silence of space stretched out before the human fleet, broken only by the soft hum of the ship's engines as they moved deeper into the unknown. Commander Darius Stone stood on the bridge of the flagship, staring out at the stars. The battle against the Harbingers had been a victory, but the cost was high. Their fleet had suffered heavy damage, and their resources were dwindling. Yet despite everything, they were still moving forward, driven by one unshakable truth: they couldn't afford to stop. "We've come this far," Darius said, his voice steady as he addressed his crew. "We've beaten the Harbingers once. Now it's time to find the heart of the enemy and end this war once and for all." Lieutenant Ava Hayes, sitting at the communications console, glanced up. "The coordinates we've been tracking lead us to a remote sector, Commander. It's where the energy signatures we've been detecting seem to originate. If the Harbingers were just the beginning, this is where we'll find the source." Darius nodded. "Then let's move out. We'll find what we need and destroy it." The fleet shifted, its ships moving in formation toward the distant sector, where the threat that had wiped out the Zar'xians, and now endangered humanity, awaited them. The tension on the bridge was thick. Every crew member knew this mission could be their last. There was no going back. As the ships entered the unknown sector, the feeling of unease grew. The sensors picked up strange energy patterns, shifting, pulsating, as if the very space around them was alive. Ava worked quickly, trying to analyze the data, but it made no sense. It was like the laws of physics were bending in this place. "Something's not right," Ava muttered. "These energy signatures, they're all coming from one point. But it's not just a ship. It's like it's a whole system, a force, something beyond a single entity." Darius walked over, his gaze fixed on the readings. "If that's the heart of the enemy's power, we need to destroy it. Now." The fleet moved closer, the strange energy field growing stronger with each passing second. The tension was unbearable. The unknown lay just ahead, and the crew could feel it. They were closing in on whatever force had set the Harbingers in motion. It was their final push, the last chance to stop this nightmare before it spread to Earth. Then, without warning, the fleet dropped into a vast, dark expanse. The energy signature had reached its peak, and now they were face to face with the enemy. A massive structure appeared in front of them, a swirling mass of energy and dark matter. It was beyond anything the human fleet had ever seen, a living, breathing entity that stretched across the void. The structure pulsed with power, and from it, a voice echoed through the ship's comm systems. "You have come far, humans," the voice said, its tone cold and ancient. "But you are too late." Darius's jaw clenched. "Who are you?" he demanded. "I am the Catalyst. The Harbingers are my servants, and you, little humans, are simply another stepping stone in my path." Ava's eyes widened in realization. It's not a species. It's a force, a cosmic entity. The Catalyst's voice resonated again. "I am the beginning and the end. I destroy civilizations, and from their ashes, I create new forms of life. The Harbingers were just the first wave. You cannot stop me." Darius took a deep breath. "We'll see about that." He turned to his crew. "All ships, full assault. Target the core. We're ending this now." The fleet opened fire, unleashing everything they had. Energy blasts, missiles, and concentrated firepower rained down on the catalyst's form, but it seemed to absorb their attacks, twisting and shifting in ways that defied reason. The power of the catalyst was unimaginable. But the human fleet had something the catalyst could not understand: determination. "Keep firing," Darius ordered, his voice sharp. "We won't stop until we take it down." Ava worked quickly, analyzing the shifting patterns of the catalyst's energy. "There's a weakness, I think. If we hit the central core with everything we have, we can destabilize it." "Do it," Darius shouted. With one final massive volley, the human fleet concentrated all their fire on the heart of the catalyst. The energy exploded in a burst of light, sending shockwaves through space. The structure trembled, and the catalyst's voice screamed in rage. "No," it roared, "you cannot destroy me." But the attack was successful. The catalyst's form shattered, collapsing in on itself. The energy field that had consumed the sector flickered and vanished. The human fleet, battered but victorious, watched in stunned silence as the force that had threatened them all disintegrated into nothing. Darius leaned back in his seat, exhausted but relieved. "It's over," he whispered.